Next though, soldiers from across the East Midlands are spending several months as United Nations peacekeepers in Cyprus. The Royal Lancers are patrolling city streets and villages that have been abandoned for more than 40 years.
Well, they're on the so-called Green Line that divides the Greek and Turkish communities. The Lancers are in the capital, Nicosia, where they're mediating between two opposing armies. And they're living in what used to be a luxury hotel, as our social affairs correspondent Jeremy Ball reports.
Patrolling a street that's frozen in time, this looks like a ghost town, but it's the heart of a capital city. And the United Nations buffer zone is so narrow here that the Royal Lancers are having to move through crumbling buildings.
It's amazing because there's basic everyday stuff just left as it was as well in some of the buildings, which is quite shocking because people have literally just stopped and left very quickly. There's like a shop fully set up, newspapers out, someone probably just reading the newspaper and the next minute they're gone. And when you finally come here and you see the scale of it, it takes breath away sometimes.
The Royal Lancers are trained to use light tanks, but here they're patrolling on bicycles. All around, signs of the Turkish invasion in 1974. That happened after thousands died in violence between the island's Greek and Turkish communities. This buffer zone's extraordinary. It goes on for more than 100 miles. On either side there are Greek, Cypriot and Turkish forces facing off against each other, and the Lancers are here in the middle, keeping the peace.
Over there you can see the flags, that denotes the ceasefire line, and beyond that is the North and the Turkish forces. You can see the yellow car, which would have been abandoned at the time in 1974. 20 yards the other way is the ceasefire line with the South. There's still a real danger of escalation, and we sort of try and nip all of that in the bud at the lowest level when there's disagreements between the two sides.
And just a few streets away, life's moved on. This side of Nicosia is controlled by the Cypriot government, but etched into a mountain across the Green Line, this huge Turkish Cypriot flag.
What we want to avoid is anything that might result in violence. The shouting of insults, the throwing of stones, the throwing of firecrackers, the cocking of weapons, all the way to construction violations such as additional sandbags or barbed wire. They may seem relatively trivial, but actually when you've been occupying these positions for 40 years, things can get quite emotional.
And back at base, an emotional tribute. The Royal Lancers refurbished this memorial to Canadian peacekeepers who lost their lives. Here too, the new British High Commissioner, who's from Tollerton in Nottinghamshire.
It looks calm on the Green Line. It's actually very tense, and to try and find a solution to the Cyprus problem that will allow the reunification of the country, which would clearly be in the interests of Cyprus, be in the interests of Britain and of the region.
But at Nicosia's old abandoned airport, they're on standby to respond to trouble, and they've also discovered some more unexpected threats.
One of the blokes walked down for morning PT and thought his sock was rolled over, so he checked his boot to pull his sock back up and found a tarantula there. Luckily the fangs were inside the boot and not on his foot.
Their living conditions are surprising too. The Royal Lancers are based in what used to be a 5-star hotel, but the Ledger Palace turned into a battleground before the 1974 ceasefire. Now the Lancers are trying to build bridges with people on both sides of the Green Line.
There's a bit of cultural differences between the two, so when you go on one side you've got to make sure you have lira on one side, the other side you've got to make sure you have euros, so you've got to have like one pocket with lira and one pocket with euros whenever you're going out. Quite bizarre.
And between the two sides, this vast wasteland, still out of bounds and left to rot, but helping to keep a fragile peace on an island that's still deeply divided. Jeremy Ball, BBC East Midlands Today, Cyprus.